She tried escaping the wedding carriage, only to find the Alpha King already there. The moon hung low that night, casting its silver glow across the marble spires of the Moonvale Palace. Inside, the air was thick with whispers, perfumed candles, and the rustle of silk gowns, all of it hiding the trembling heart of a young werewolf princess named Serafina. Her wedding day had come, but to her it felt like the closing of a cage. Serafina had been raised among ancient oaths and unbroken bloodlines. Her pack, the Silvercrest, was known for its loyalty and strength, but it had suffered years of decline, their borders weakened, their alliances shattered. To save them, her father had done the unthinkable. He had promised her hand to the one wolf every kingdom feared, Alpha King Kale Draven. Kale was not merely a ruler, he was a legend shrouded in shadows. The youngest Alpha ever crowned, his reign was built on conquest and blood. He ruled over the Obsidian Dominion, a vast empire where werewolves and humans alike bowed under his command. They said his beast was untamable, that his howl could break an enemy's bones, that his rage could summon storms. And soon, by royal decree, Serafina was to be his queen. But love cannot be ordered. Fear cannot be disguised, and hearts raised in golden cages often dream of escape. That night, while the palace slept beneath its glittering chandeliers and the servants prepared the bridal carriage for dawn, Serafina made her choice. Dressed in white silk that shimmered like moonlight, she slipped silently through the servants' corridor, her veil trailing behind her like a ghost of duty abandoned. Every footstep echoed with the weight of rebellion. She knew the punishment for treason against the Alpha King could mean death, not only for her, but for her pack. Yet the thought of belonging to a man she had never met, a beast whispered to be ruthless and cold, burned more fiercely than fear. Beyond the palace gates, the forest awaited, vast, dark, alive. The wind carried the scent of rain and pine, and the distant growl of thunder rolled over the mountains. The forest was forbidden to cross alone. Wolves who strayed from its trails never returned. But freedom had a taste stronger than fear. As she reached the carriage yard, her pulse pounded like war drums. The royal guard stood at the outer gate, armor gleaming faintly. She hid behind the stable walls, her heart racing. Horses snorted softly, sensing her presence. She had planned everything. She would steal one of the lesser carriages meant for the maids and ride west until the dawn light masked her trail. Lightning flashed, a jagged scar across the heavens. For a brief moment, it illuminated the horizon, revealing the faint owl. In of the Obsidian Mountains, Kale's domain. Even from this distance, it looked like a shadow swallowing the world. Serafina closed her eyes and whispered a silent prayer to the moon goddess. "Forgive me, mother of the moon," she thought, "but I cannot give my heart to a king I do not know. I cannot be bound to a beast I cannot love." The horses stirred. The thunder grew louder. Somewhere deep inside her, the wolf stirred too, that ancient part of her blood that yearned not for obedience, but for survival. She climbed into the small carriage, her gown damp from the mist, her hands trembling as she grasped the reins. For the first time in her life, she felt alive. Not a princess, not a bargaining piece, but a creature of instinct and will. She cracked the reins, the horses whinnied, the wheels creaked, and the carriage lurched forward into the storm. The rain began to fall in torrents, drumming against the roof as she urged the horses faster, deeper into the forest. Trees loomed like sentinels, their branches heavy and whispering secrets. Her veil tore against a low branch, carried away by the wind like a strip of moonlight. She didn't look back, but destiny, as every wolf knows, does not let its prey escape so easily. Hours passed. The rain turned to fog. The path she followed faded into mud and shadow. Then, suddenly, the horses reared in terror. The carriage jolted violently, the wheels sliding against the wet earth. Serafina screamed as the world tilted. The carriage toppled, crashing into a ditch. Silence followed, thick, suffocating. The storm's rage faded to a murmur. Serafina's body ached, her hands cut and bruised. She pushed herself up, coughing, the scent of blood in her mouth. The horses had fled. Her gown was torn. She was alone, or so she thought. From the darkness, a low growl echoed. It wasn't the snarl of a common wolf, it was deeper, darker, filled with power. The air thickened, her pulse racing. Her wolf stirred again, sensing what her human senses could not: dominance. Command. Something ancient and dangerous watching her from the shadows. Then, movement. A tall figure stepped from the fog. Black cloak soaked with rain. Eyes burning like molten gold. Power radiated from him like heat from a wildfire. His presence silenced the forest itself. Serafina froze, her breath catching. She didn't need an introduction to know who stood before her. The Alpha King had found her. Kale Draven, the very monster she had tried to escape, was already in the carriage she had meant to flee. And now, drenched in rain and trembling with defiance, she realized the cruel twist of fate. She hadn't run from her destiny. She had run straight into its arms. The forest was silent, as if holding its breath. Mist curled like ghosts around the Ansi. Ent trees, and the rain fell in whispers now, soft and patient, as though the storm itself bowed before the presence of the man who had emerged from its depths. Serafina could feel it in her bones, that heavy, magnetic pull that belonged only to an alpha of ancient blood. Her instincts screamed both warning and awe. The beast within her stirred restlessly, clawing at her chest, torn between submission and defiance. The figure moved closer, and the faint moonlight revealed the man behind the legend. Kale Draven, the Alpha King. He was taller than she had imagined, his frame powerful, his shoulders broad beneath his drenched cloak. His hair, black as midnight, clung to his chiseled jawline, and his eyes glowed faintly gold, the unmistakable mark of a royal bloodline touched by the moon's fire. There was something almost unearthly about him, a force that made the air tremble, that made the rain hesitate before touching him. The stories had painted him as a monster, but monsters did not move with such controlled grace. He was danger sculpted into beauty, power cloaked in restraint. And when those burning eyes met hers, she felt the fragile threads of her rebellion begin to unravel. Serafina tried to stand, clutching at the carriage door for balance. Her ankle throbbed, and the fabric of her torn gown clung to her like second skin. She could feel his gaze traveling over her, not with lust, but with curiosity. As if he were reading the secrets her soul was too afraid to speak. He stopped a few feet away, the scent of rain, smoke, and wild pine filling the space between them. It was the scent of dominance, of danger, of him. The world seemed to shrink to that single moment, her heart pounding, his silence heavy with unspoken understanding. Somewhere deep within her, her wolf trembled, not in fear, but in recognition. As though some ancient bond written in blood and destiny had been reawakened. She didn't understand it, didn't want to, but it was there. Real, unyielding. He stepped closer. The fog parted around him like it obeyed his will. And then, in a motion too swift for her mortal eyes, he reached down and lifted her from the wreckage. His touch was searing, strong, commanding, yet surprisingly gentle. It felt like fire against her skin. The world blurred. Her breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she was close enough to see the faint scar running from his temple to his jaw, a reminder that even kings bleed. And in that scar, she saw something she hadn't expected: humanity. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The weight of his silence said everything. It said he knew who she was. It said he had been expecting her. And it said that her attempt to escape had only brought her closer to where she truly belonged. He carried her effort. Leslie, as though she weighed nothing, striding through the forest with purpose. Each step was sure, unwavering. She felt his heartbeat, steady, powerful, as though it set the rhythm of the world itself. The forest shifted around them. The fog seemed to follow, parting before him and closing behind like a living thing. She caught glimpses of silver symbols etched into the trees, ancient runes of protection belonging to the Obsidian Dominion. She had crossed into his territory without realizing it. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. She was no longer the runaway bride of Silvercrest. She was the captive of the most dangerous alpha alive. After what felt like hours, the trees began to thin, revealing a sight so breathtaking it momentarily silenced her fear. The Obsidian Keep. It rose from the cliffs like something carved by gods, black stone towers wreathed in mist, their peaks crowned by silver banners that shimmered faintly under the moonlight. Lightning danced across the horizon, illuminating its monstrous beauty. It was both a palace and a fortress, the heart of Kale's empire. Below, the city of wolves stretched out, alive even in the dead of night. Fires burned in tall iron braziers. The sound of howls echoed faintly through the valley, mournful and proud. As they entered the gates, the guards knelt, their eyes lowered. Not a single one dared to meet their alpha's gaze. Kale carried her up the marble steps, through vast corridors of dark glass and ancient stone. Every inch of the palace seemed to hum with power. Portraits of alpha kings past lined the walls, their eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. He took her to a chamber draped in silver and obsidian, where a fire burned low in the hearth. Only then did he set her down, careful not to let her injured ankle touch the ground. Serafina's heart still raced. The air between them was thick, not just with tension, but with something deeper. Something primal. Kale stood before her, the fire casting shadows over his face. The flames reflected in his golden eyes, making him look like the embodiment of the night itself. He removed his cloak, revealing a tunic of black leather that clung to the sculpted strength beneath. The marks of his lineage, the faint silver veins of alpha blood, pulsed faintly under his skin. And in that moment, Serafina realized the terrifying truth. This was not a man she could outwit or outrun. This was fate made flesh. He turned, his gaze sweeping over her one last time before walking to the balcony. The wind howled softly, carrying the scent of the coming dawn. He raised his head to the sky, and for the briefest moment, his wolf surged forward, visible in the flash of gold that overtook his eyes. When he finally looked back, something in his expression had changed. The cold command had softened, not into warmth, but into recognition. And though he said nothing, Serafina felt it, that silent, impossible truth that no amount of denial could erase. The Alpha King's beast had found its mate, and she was standing right before him. Dawn crept slowly over the obsidian dominion, bleeding gold and gray across a restless sky. The city below the keep stirred with the sounds of awakening, the distant cries of merchants, the haunting echo of mourning howls from the outer forests, the hum of life bound beneath the Alpha King's rule. Yet within the towering fortress of obsidian stone, the world remained hushed, caught in the fragile stillness between two storms, the one that had raged in the night, and the one about to awaken within the hearts of its two unwilling occupants. Serafina sat near the tall window, wrapped in a cloak too large for her slender frame. The first rays of sunlight spilled across her skin, catching in the silver strands of her hair, a trait unique to the royal bloodline of Silvercrest. Her eyes, pale as moonlight, looked out across the endless expanse of the Dominion. From this height, she could see the world that belonged to him, to Kale Draven, the Alpha King who had conquered lands and bloodlines alike. It was a kingdom unlike any other, vast forests stretching beyond sight, rivers carved like veins of light, villages woven between cliffs and plains where werewolves lived by the code of the moon. But at its center, looming above all, stood the obsidian keep, the symbol of unbroken dominance. Everything here moved by Kale's will. Every breath was taken under his reign. And now, she was part of it. A faint ache pulsed in her ankle, a reminder of the night before. Her mind replayed the chaos, the carriage crash, the forest, the eyes that glowed in the darkness. The way he had appeared not as a savior nor captor, but something far more dangerous, inevitable. She could still feel the ghost of his touch against her skin, the heat of his strength when he had lifted her, the unspoken command in his silence. The fire in the hearth had burned down to embers. The room around her seemed too large, too silent, the air heavy with the scent of smoke and cedar. She had been placed in the royal chambers, not a prison, but not a sanctuary either. A gilded cage dressed in silks and silver. Outside, the kingdom woke. Inside, Serafina wrestled with the truth she could no longer deny. She had run from her fate, only to find that it had claws. The Alpha King had marked her, not in the physical sense, not yet, but in ways far deeper. His scent lingered in the air, faint but inescapable. His presence was everywhere, woven into the stones, the wind, the rhythm of her pulse. She hated the way her wolf responded to it, the way her instincts betrayed her, whispering that he was power, safety, belonging. But belonging to him would mean surrender. And she was not a creature made for chains. The great doors of the chamber opened hours later. Silent attendants entered, their heads bowed, moving like shadows. They brought food, water, garments woven from fine black silk. None met her gaze. They served not her, but him. When they left, she rose from her place by the window and walked to the mirror that stood at the far end of the room. Her reflection looked like a stranger's, pale, wild-eyed, her silver hair tangled and her lips bruised from the cold. Yet beneath the surface, something new flickered in her expression, defiance wrapped in uncertainty. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faintest echo of a howl. It came from somewhere deep within the keep, low, commanding, and unmistakably his. The sound stirred something ancient in her blood. It wasn't just a call, it was a summoning. The Alpha King's presence reached her even from afar, and the wolf within her answered before she could stop it, a tremor passing through her heart like lightning. Her mark had not been made upon her skin, but within her soul. And somewhere in the heart of the keep, Cale Draven felt it too. He stood in the council chamber, towering above his advisors, his aura coiled and restrained like a storm bound by mortal walls. His golden eyes gleamed with the remnants of the night's fire. Around him, the other alphas, rulers of smaller packs bound under his banner, spoke in hushed tones about border disputes and alliances. But his attention was far away, fixed upon something unseen. The moment he had touched her, the connection had ignited, fierce and unrelenting. He had not meant to seek her scent that night, she had been running toward him long before he had found her. The moon herself had woven their paths together. The pull between them was undeniable, primal, ancient, the bond of mates chosen by fate, not will. Yet Cale was a man who had long defied fate. He had built an empire with his own hands, forged peace through power, and buried every weakness beneath armor and command. He had sworn never to take a mate, never to allow the moon's bond to dictate his reign. Love, he believed, was the ruin of kings. And yet, when he had seen her, drenched, trembling, radiant even in rebellion, something inside him had shifted. The beast that lived beneath his skin had stirred and whispered her name before he even knew it. Now, as the dawn light spilled across his throne room, that same beast clawed to the surface. The council's voices faded. His heartbeat thundered. The scent of her lingered in his mind, wildflowers and rain. He clenched his jaw, struggling to push the feeling down, to bury it beneath centuries of discipline. But destiny, once awakened, could not be silenced. He dismissed the council with a wave of his hand. Alone in the great hall, Cale turned toward the window and watched the sunlight creep across the horizon. It was the same light touching her face in the chamber above. A fragile connection, but enough to stir something he had long buried, the longing of a man who had forgotten what it meant to feel. Serafina. The name was a whisper on the wind. By midday, the keep was alive with movement. Couriers arrived with messages from distant territories, guards patrolled the walls, the servants moved with quiet precision. Yet beneath it all, an invisible thread hummed, the unspoken tension between the Alpha King and his runaway bride. As the hours passed, Serafina found herself drawn to the balcony overlooking the courtyard. Below, she saw him, a figure of command and shadow, speaking with his generals, his voice deep and unwavering. Even from this distance, his presence pulled at her like gravity. He was everything she had been told to fear, and yet, everything her wolf longed for. She wanted to look away, to retreat into the safety of denial, but she couldn't. Her gaze remained locked on him, her pulse quickening as if recognizing its counterpart. The beast within her stirred again, whispering of bonds older than blood, of destiny written under the moon. And then, as if feeling her eyes on him, Cale lifted his head. Their gazes met across the courtyard, king and runaway, hunter and prey, Alpha and his fated mate. Time seemed to fracture around them, the world narrowing to that single, silent exchange. The wind carried the scent of rain and roses between them. Her heart thudded. His eyes darkened. The connection between them pulsed like a living thing, wild, uncontrollable, sacred. It was the mark of the moon, invisible to the world but seared into their souls. And though neither spoke, both knew the truth. Their fates were no longer their own. The obsidian keep breathed like a living beast. Its walls whispered with ancient power, its corridors pulsed with the scent of dominance and silver moonlight. By day, it was a fortress of discipline and command. By night, it became something else, a temple to the untamed heart of the werewolf race, where the moon's pull governed not reason but instinct. And in the very center of that beating heart stood Serafina, torn between who she was and who the moon demanded she become. The morning after their fated gaze had crossed, the castle seemed different. Every flicker of torchlight, every echo of boot against marble seemed sharper, heavier, as if aware that something unspoken had been set into motion. Even the servants moved more cautiously, whispering behind closed doors of the Silvercrest Princess and the curse of the Alpha King. But curses, Serafina knew, were merely the echoes of truth that frightened men could not name. She stood by the window again, her pale hair flowing down her back like molten silver, her eyes tracing the mist curling over the forest beyond the walls. The rain had returned, soft this time, rhythmic against the glass. The sound soothed her, reminded her of home, of the nights she had spent in the Silvercrest Sanctuary where the moon's glow touched every blade of grass like a blessing. But that home was gone now. Burned into memory. Here, in the Alpha King's domain, everything felt sharper, colder, alive in a way that made her blood tremble. The pull of the bond grew stronger with every passing hour, like invisible chains coiling around her heart. She could feel him even when he wasn't there, his energy, his dominance, the fierce, consuming awareness that she was being watched not out of suspicion but out of connection. It was as though her very heartbeat was now tethered to his. Far below, the training grounds came alive with the growls and roars of warriors. From her balcony, Serafina watched the spectacle unfold. Dozens of wolves sparring in their beast forms, bodies made of strength and sinew, their howls echoing through the valley. And there, in the midst of it all, was him. Kael Draven. The Alpha King moved like fire itself, raw, untamed, and devastatingly precise. His every motion spoke of power honed through centuries of control. He fought not like a ruler, but like a predator, silent, efficient, unstoppable. The sight of him was mesmerizing and terrifying. His body was a canvas of scars, each one a memory carved by survival and conquest. And yet, even from this distance, she felt it, the strange tenderness hidden beneath the savagery. The same unspoken restraint that had guided his hand when he had lifted her from the wreckage that night. The beast who could destroy armies had chosen to protect her. The fire in her chest burned hotter. The wolf inside her stirred restlessly, sensing what her mind still refused to admit. The moon's bond was not a choice. It was law, ancient, sacred, irrevocable. And once sealed, no force could break it. But bonds forged in destiny were also tested by fire. As dusk fell, the keep transformed under the breath of the rising moon. Torches blazed, shadows deepened, and a cold wind swept through the halls carrying whispers of prophecy. The court assembled in the grand hall, a vast chamber carved from black stone and silver veins, lit by chandeliers shaped like wolf fangs. The alphas of subordinate packs had gathered, their armor gleaming, their scents thick with pride and submission. They came to pledge loyalty. They came to witness the ruler who had never bowed. And tonight, they came to see the one woman who dared defy him. Serafina entered, her gown flowing like a river of pale light, her chin held high though her pulse raced like a trapped bird's. The crowd parted as she passed, some with awe, others with envy, and many with fear. Her presence was unlike anything the keep had known. She was grace carved from rebellion, light walking through shadow. At the far end of the hall, Kael waited upon the throne of obsidian and iron, the Alpha King in his full glory. The crown rested upon his dark hair, forged from the bones of wolves long dead, inlaid with silver runes that pulsed faintly under the moonlight. His eyes, those molten gold orbs, followed her with a calm that felt more dangerous than rage. The moment her foot touched the final step, the moon's power surged through the hall. Every torch flickered, every wolf bowed instinctively. Even those who did not understand what was happening could feel it, the pull between two souls marked by fate. The ancient magic of the mate bond shimmered faintly in the air, like static before lightning. Serafina's breath caught. The mark was calling. Somewhere deep within her, the beast howled, not in pain, but in recognition. Her pulse became the rhythm of a drum older than time itself. The Alpha King's aura expanded, engulfing the hall in raw energy. The wolves knelt. The walls trembled. And then, silence. The moon broke through the clouds outside, casting a beam of light directly upon them. The ancient bond ignited. No words were spoken. No ceremony performed. The moon itself bore witness. A thread of silver light coiled between them, visible only to those who carried the blood of wolves. It touched her heart, then his, merging their energy into one living flame. The mark, invisible to human eyes, eternal to their kind, was sealed. The court gasped, some in awe, others in fear. But Kale remained still, his expression unreadable as the glow faded, leaving only silence in its wake. Serafina stood trembling, her soul aflame. She could feel him, every heartbeat, every breath, every suppressed emotion buried beneath years of solitude and war. It was overwhelming, intoxicating, terrifying. She wanted to flee, yet she knew there was no escaping him now. The bond was complete. But with the bond came fire, the kind that could heal or destroy. The moon had chosen, and the consequences would ripple through every pack, every kingdom, every shadowed corner of their world. As the hall emptied and the murmurs faded, Serafina remained at the edge of the throne dais, staring at the distant moon through the high windows. Her mind was chaos, her body alive with energy she did not understand. Behind her, the Alpha King's presence filled the space like thunder before a storm. His gaze lingered on her, not as a conqueror looking at his prize, but as something far more primal. A force meeting its reflection. And though neither spoke, both knew that what had begun could no longer be undone. The night after the binding was heavy with silence, the kind that comes after storms, when the world holds its breath and the air hums with the scent of change. The moon lingered over the obsidian keep, full and merciless, watching over the two souls it had entwined. Shadows stretched long across the marble floors, the torches burned lower, as if unwilling to disturb what destiny had just sealed. Serafina could not sleep. Sleep felt impossible when her veins pulsed with the echo of another heartbeat, his heartbeat. She sat upon the balcony, the cold wind tangling her silver hair, the moonlight staining her skin like liquid frost. Every sense was heightened. Every breath carried the scent of his presence, cedar, smoke, and something ancient, dangerous, and impossibly magnetic. She could feel him even through the stone walls that separated them, could feel the weight of his thoughts pressing against hers in the dark. The bond was alive. It whispered in her blood, sang in her bones, called to her with a pull older than language. It terrified her how much she could feel. The steadiness of his power. The restraint behind his control. The deep, wordless ache that lived inside him, one that mirrored her own. In the halls below, the keep slept uneasily. The warriors of the Shadowfang pack dreamed of their king's new queen, and with those dreams came whispers of prophecy. Old scrolls spoke of the union of moon and flame, of a princess born under the silver star who would bind the Alpha King and end the curse of the blood moon. But prophecy never came without sacrifice. As dawn broke, the fortress awoke under a veil of silver mist. The banners fluttered with the morning wind, the forests below the cliffs shimmered with dew, and the first light of day painted the kingdom in pale gold. The Alpha King was already awake, as always. He stood in the great courtyard, training alone, his bare chest glistening with sweat, his muscles taut with power and purpose. Every motion was precise, deliberate, a warrior king sculpted by centuries of conflict. Yet there was something different in the way he moved now, a subtle shift, an undercurrent of tension that no blade or enemy could provoke. Because she was here, the bond had changed him, too. For the first time in years, his wolf stirred not from anger, but from need. The kind of primal, sacred pull that defied command. He had lived lifetimes without weakness, yet this bond made him feel both invincible and undone. He could conquer armies, but not the silence that followed her. Absence. When Serafina finally stepped into the courtyard, the world seemed to still. She wore no crown, no jewels, only a simple cloak of white fur that caught the wind like wings. The light touched her face, revealing the quiet strength behind her calm. She was not a queen yet, not by ceremony, but by presence alone. The wolves that guarded the walls lowered their heads as she passed. Even the air seemed to bend toward her. From the shadows, Kale turned. The look that passed between them was not one of strangers nor of lovers, but something far deeper, recognition of a truth neither could name. Their souls had already spoken in the language of the moon. What remained now was understanding. Serafina stopped at the edge of the courtyard, watching him. The sound of steel against steel rang through the air, echoing like a heartbeat. His every movement spoke of control, yet his eyes betrayed the storm beneath. The moment her gaze met his, the bond flared, unseen but undeniable. The connection burned through her like fire and frost at once. She could feel his pulse, his breath, the faint tremor of restraint that kept his beast from rising. The wolf within her howled in response, recognizing its equal. It was unbearable, and intoxicating. She turned away, unable to endure the weight of it. But even as she walked back toward the keep, she knew something had shifted. There was no escaping this gravity. No running from what fate had written in blood and starlight. As the day stretched on, the kingdom around them hummed with uneasy anticipation. Messengers came from distant packs, emissaries of both allegiance and suspicion. The news of the moon's chosen bond had spread like wildfire. Some celebrated, others plotted. For where there was power, envy followed. That evening, when the sun bled red into the horizon, Serafina found herself wandering the ancient halls of the keep, halls lined with portraits of kings who had ruled through conquest and shadow. Yet none of them, she realized, had looked at peace. At the far end of the corridor hung a painting unlike the rest. It showed a woman, her features hauntingly familiar, standing beneath a blood-red moon, her hand resting upon a wolf's muzzle. The inscription beneath it read, "The first flame, who loved the Wolf King and was lost to prophecy." Serafina's heart clenched. The story of the first flame was a legend whispered by mothers and priestesses, the tale of the first Lina who had bound herself to an Alpha King and vanished into the ether of war. A union that had brought peace, but at a cost too great to bear. Was she destined to walk the same path? Before she could dwell further, the air shifted. A ripple of power coursed through the corridor, faint but unmistakable. She turned slowly, and the he was. Kale stood at the far end, his expression unreadable, his eyes gleaming like gold caught between light and shadow. He moved closer, silent as the wind, and the bond between them thrummed like a living thing. The world seemed to narrow, the air thick with energy that neither dared name. He stopped before her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that the faint scent of smoke and frost enveloped her senses. The moonlight painted them both in silver, two halves of the same creation, caught in a moment neither could escape. For a heartbeat, time stopped. The world outside ceased to exist. The fire within her chest roared to life, wild, untamed, burning through every wall she had ever built. And though no words were spoken, the truth rang louder than any vow. They were bound not by choice, but by the law of existence itself. The Alpha King and the Silver-Crest Princess, wolf and flame, bound by prophecy, destined for war and redemption. The mark upon their souls burned faintly once more, responding to the closeness. A pulse of light flickered between them, silver and gold intertwining for the briefest instant before fading into the dark. And in that silence, both knew that the fire would only grow. For destiny was patient, but desire was relentless. And the moon does not choose without reason. Beyond the keep's walls, thunder rolled across the distant mountains. A storm was coming, not of rain, but of power, blood, and revelation. The bond had been forged. The hearts had been claimed. Now the world would bear witness to what happens when a flame dares to love the wolf who commands the night. The storm did not begin with thunder. It began with silence, the kind that lies heavy before a great shift, the hush that drapes over the world when destiny exhales. By the time dawn broke, the sky above the Shadowfang kingdom had already turned to steel. Winds howled through the mountains, and the banners bearing the Alpha King's sigil whipped violently in the air. The scent of rain mixed with iron and smoke, a warning carried on the breath of the gods themselves. Within the obsidian keep, Serafina stood before the ancient mirror in her chambers. The reflection staring back was no longer the frightened runaway who had tried to escape her fate. Her eyes now glowed faintly with lunar light, her aura a quiet storm of silver and flame. The mark that bound her to Kale shimmered faintly beneath her skin, no longer a wound, but a living bond. Outside, the Council of Alphas had arrived. 15 packs, 15 rulers, all gathered to witness the union between the most powerful Alpha King in centuries and the Silvercrest heir, whose lineage was said to be born of the moon herself. But not all had come to celebrate. Serafina could feel the tension threading through the air, sharp as glass. Every whisper carried suspicion. Every glance carried envy. There were those who feared her, and those who wanted her gone. As she moved through the marble corridors toward the great hall, her wolf stirred beneath her skin. The closer she came to Cale's presence, the stronger the pull became, an invisible current that bound her to his soul. The great hall was a cathedral of shadows and light. Massive pillars carved from black stone reached toward the vaulted ceiling, where chandeliers dripped with silver flame. The alphas stood in a crescent around the throne dais, their eyes gleaming with barely masked curiosity. And there he was, Cale, the Alpha King, clad in obsidian armor trimmed with crimson and silver. His very presence silenced the hall. His power radiated in waves, ancient and commanding, the kind of authority that could make wolves kneel and mountains tremble. Yet his gaze, when it found hers, softened in a way that none would ever understand. In that glance was recognition. In that glance was everything. She ascended the dais slowly, her every step echoing across the marble floor. The hall's torches flickered, responding to the bond that pulsed between them. And when she reached his side, the air itself seemed to hold its breath. The high priest began the invocation. Words of oath, of destiny, of the moon's decree. But the storm outside grew stronger, the thunder rolling closer with each vow spoken. The flames in the chandeliers flared, twisting white and gold. Then, a flash of lightning. A crash that shook the very foundation of the keep. The great doors burst open. Wind and rain howled through the hall, extinguishing torches, sending scrolls and silks flying. Warriors drew their blades in an instant, but Cale raised his hand, a single motion that commanded silence. Through the torrent stepped a figure cloaked in tattered crimson, his presence as wild as the storm itself. Ravik, Cale murmured, though only the sharpest of ears could have heard it. The rogue Alpha, once Cale's brother in arms. Now a traitor branded by exile. He looked around the hall, his eyes burning with madness and bitterness, until they landed on Serafina. And in that gaze was not hatred. It was recognition. The prophecy, Ravik rasped, his voice cracking through the silence like lightning. The moon's chosen will bring salvation or ruin. Do you even know which side she walks upon, Cale? The council erupted in murmurs. Some gasped. Others looked to Serafina with suspicion. Cale's expression hardened, every inch of him radiating lethal calm. But Serafina, she felt something else. A tremor deep within her chest, as if the prophecy he spoke of was not foreign, but buried so. Mwhere in her blood. The mark beneath her skin burned. The storm outside screamed, echoing her heartbeat. And then, without warning, Ravik lunged. Steel met steel in a flash. The throne hall exploded into chaos, wolves shifting, claws and fangs flashing beneath the chandelier's dying light. The scent of ozone and blood filled the air. Cale's roar shook the stones themselves, his form blurring as he half-shifted, his golden eyes blazing with the fury of the Alpha King. Serafina's wolf surged to the surface. Her power flared like a comet, silver and flame entwined, throwing Ravik back with a wave of raw lunar energy. The air shimmered with her aura, radiant, otherworldly, impossible to ignore. The alphas froze. None had ever seen power like it. Cale stood at her side in an instant, his chest heaving, his body trembling with restraint. Their eyes met, a storm meeting its flame. Together, they moved as one. Ravik fell before them, not by Cale's sword, nor Serafina's flame, but by the weight of destiny itself. When silence returned to the hall, the storm outside began to fade. The rain softened, and the clouds parted to reveal the moon, full, bright, and watching. Its light poured through the shattered windows, bathing them both in silver. And in that light, the truth became clear to all who witnessed it. The Alpha King was not merely bound by the moon's decree. He was chosen to stand beside the one who could end the curse that had haunted their kind for centuries. Serafina, the silver flame. Cale, the wolf of shadows. Two forces bound by fate, by fire, by love. As the council bowed in reverence, the priest spoke the final words of the vow, his voice trembling in awe. In the name of the moon, the blood, and the flame, the king and Lina are one. The bond sealed, their marks flared with light, twin sigils burning across their skin like constellations reborn. And in that sacred moment, as the kingdom trembled beneath the weight of destiny, Serafina felt peace for the first time. For in his presence, the storm no longer frightened her. It was home. The dawn after the storm was quieter than the world deserved. Mist rolled through the valley like drifting ghosts, and the sun struggled to pierce through the veil of clouds that still clung to the mountaintops. The obsidian keep stood untouched, its walls unbroken, its fires burning steady, yet inside, everything had changed. The Alpha King and his fated Luna were bound. The mark that sealed their union now pulsed faintly with the rhythm of the moon, linking their souls like twin stars caught in orbit. Across the Shadowfang lands, wolves stirred in reverence. A power older than the bloodline itself had awakened, a harmony that rippled through every pack and forest. But power never comes without consequence. In the Great Hall, the council had dispersed, leaving behind whispers that clung to the walls like smoke. Some called her salvation, others called her curse. The prophecy had been spoken aloud, and words like that could not be taken back. Serafina felt it in every glance that followed her through the corridors: awe, fear, uncertainty. The air hummed with expectation, yet her own heart was restless. Her wolf had grown stronger since the bond was sealed, her senses sharper, her instincts louder. She could hear the mountains breathing, feel the moon's pulse in her veins. It was as though the world had expanded inside her. Still, something in the shadows stirred, something ancient and watching. That morning, she stood upon the balcony overlooking the valley. The forest stretched endlessly below, rivers gleaming like molten silver. The scent of rain lingered in the air, mingled with the faint perfume of night-blooming jasmine. She inhaled deeply, trying to anchor herself, to remember who she had been before destiny took her name and reshaped it into something divine. Once, she had been merely a princess, a daughter bound by duty. Now, she was Luna, queen to the Alpha King, a symbol of unity in a world divided by fear and hunger. But beneath the crown of fate, her heart still beat with the same quiet longing, to understand herself, to find peace not just in prophecy, but in love. Far below, the wolves of Shadowfang gathered in the training fields, their armor glinting under the dim sunlight. The rhythmic clash of steel echoed up to the balcony, disciplined, relentless. Kale's warriors trained as though the storm had never passed. Yet their movements were sharper now, their spirits lighter. The king's bond had given them something no war ever had: hope. Inside the keep, the halls whispered with change. The throne room, once a cold monument of command, now bore traces of life. Silver tapestries replaced crimson banners. The scent of incense and wild roses lingered where smoke once ruled. Even the torches burned brighter, responding to her energy. The Alpha King's world was slowly shifting, touched by light. Yet Kale himself remained distant that morning, buried in council meetings and matters of defense. The attack from Ravik had left scars not just on stone, but on trust. The other Alphas were restless, fearing rebellion. The balance between peace and chaos was fragile as glass. Serafina spent the hours walking the ancient corridors, listening to the keep's pulse. Every brick, every carving whispered the story of their ancestors, kings and queens who had risen and fallen under the moon's gaze. But there was one chamber, locked and forgotten, that called to her in a voice not her own. At the end of the east wing, behind a curtain of ivy and dust, stood an arched door carved with the sigil of the first flame. Her heart stuttered when she saw it, the same mark that glowed faintly upon her skin. She reached out. The metal was cold, yet the moment her palm touched it, warmth bloomed from within. The lock turned with a soft click, as though the door had been waiting for her. Inside, the room was drenched in twilight. Moonlight filtered through a crack in the ceiling, falling upon a stone altar at the center. Upon it rested a single crystal, white, glowing faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat. The moment she stepped closer, visions flooded her mind. Flashes of battlefields, wolves cloaked in flame and shadow. A woman crowned in silver light, standing beside a king whose eyes burned gold. The same woman from the painting. The first flame. Serafina gasped as the memory unfolded through her, not as a dream, but as inheritance. The first flame was not a myth. She had been real, her blood carried forward through generations, her spirit echoing in Serafina's veins. The power that had once sealed peace was now awakening within her. Her fingers brushed the crystal, and a surge of energy rippled through her body, radiant, blinding. The mark on her skin flared, its light filling the room. The walls trembled. The air crackled with magic older than time. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the light dimmed. When her vision cleared, the crystal was gone, absorbed into her, its power now part of her soul. She staggered, breathless, trembling from the weight of what she had seen. The prophecy was no longer a story to her. It was a map of her blood. Outside, Cale felt it too. Across the keep, he froze mid-sentence, his wolf reacting to the surge of lunar fire that rippled through their bond. His golden eyes darkened, his chest tightening. Every instinct screamed her name. He was already moving before thought could catch him, striding through the corridors like a storm given form. When he found her in the twilight chamber, she was on her knees, surrounded by the fading glow of magic. Her silver hair caught the light, her eyes reflecting both power and fear. He stopped at the threshold, heart pounding, and though words never passed between them, he understood. Something inside her had awakened, something that would change everything. The air between them shimmered. The bond burned hot and bright, flaring with energy that neither could contain. The ground beneath them vibrated with raw power, as if the moon itself watched in silence. Seraphina's power, her flame, had awakened fully. And as Cale reached out, his hand hovering just above hers, the light of the moon poured through the crack in the ceiling, bathing them both in silver fire. Two souls, one destiny. Wolf and flame, shadow and light. From that day, the kingdom would no longer whisper her name with uncertainty. They would remember her as the queen who carried the light of the first flame, the Lina who would either save their world, or burn it to ash. The days that followed were heavy with omens. The sky refused to clear, clouds hung like mourning veils over the mountains, and the wind carried the scent of iron and rain. Across the Shadowfang lands, the howls of restless wolves echoed through the forests, a call that spoke of gathering storms and unspoken fear. Peace, it seemed, was only an illusion stretched thin over a wound that had never truly healed. The rogue packs, loyal once to Cale but now fractured by greed and prophecy, began to move in the shadows. Scouts vanished near the borders. Watchtowers reported movement in the dead of night, unseen shapes slipping through the mists. Something dark was stirring beyond the kingdom's walls, something ancient and patient. Within the obsidian keep, Seraphina's awakening had not gone unnoticed. The moment she absorbed the crystal's essence, the heart of the first flame, a ripple had spread across the spiritual planes. The old gods had felt it. The forgotten ones who once ruled the wolves from the stars had turned their gaze toward the mortal realm once more. And somewhere deep beneath the forests, sealed in the ruins of a fallen pack, a presence long buried began to stir. The war of blood and moon was beginning, just as the prophecy had warned. Seraphina now spent her nights in the old temple chambers, studying the scrolls of the moon priests, parchments written in ink that shimmered like starlight, telling of the balance between shadow and flame. Her power was growing faster than she could control. Every time the moon rose, it pulled at her magic like a tide, testing her restraint. Sometimes, she would stand alone at the highest tower of the keep, feeling the pulse of the kingdom below. The wolves moved like living rivers, the forests whispered her name, and the bond between her and Cale pulsed like a heartbeat shared by two souls in one body. Yet even amidst the awe, fear lingered. She could sense it in the way warriors bowed lower than before. In the way servants glanced away when her power flared unbidden. And most of all, in the way Cale watched her, silently, protectively, as though she carried something too sacred to touch. Their bond had grown stronger since the sealing, binding their emotions as deeply as their strength. Through it, she could feel the constant weight he bore, the burden of a king torn between love and duty, between a prophecy he could not ignore and a woman he could not lose. He had faced countless wars, but this was different. This was not a battle for land or power. It was a war for the soul of their kind. When the first messenger arrived, his armor scorched, his breath ragged, the council was summoned in haste. The message was simple, but heavy enough to silence every voice in the hall. The eastern border had fallen. The rogue alphas had formed an alliance, a gathering of the exiled, the bitter, the broken. And at their head stood a name thought long dead, Ravik. He had not perished that night in the throne hall. He had fled, wounded, but alive, and now he returned with an army born of hatred and darkness. He carried with him a relic stolen from the ruins of the Bloodfang Sanctum, a weapon whispered to rival even the moon's chosen power. The Bloodstone Spear, forged in the age before light. That night, the council's torches burned low as strategies were drawn. The kingdom's defenses would hold, Kale vowed. But Serafina could see what the others could not, the unease behind his gold-lit eyes, the way his hand lingered over the hilt of his sword long after the hall had emptied. He knew this battle would not be won with steel alone. For in her dreams, Serafina began to see fragments of what was coming, flashes of red skies, wolves turned to ash, and the moon itself bleeding light. And always, a voice whispered her name from the dark. A voice that was not her own. By the second moonrise, the armies had gathered. From the northern tundras came the frost-born clans, their armor glinting like ice. From the southern forests marched the shadow wolves, silent as ghosts. Every banner of loyalty unfurled, every oath sworn beneath the moon. Serafina stood beside Kale at the head of the army as the gates of the obsidian keep opened. Below them, the valley glowed faintly in the light of dawn, endless ranks of wolves, warriors, and spirit-bound beasts, their breath rising in misted clouds. The wind howled through the cliffs, carrying the scent of blood and prophecy. The Alpha King raised his hand, and silence fell. The drums began to beat, slow, steady, ancient. And then the army moved. The war of blood and moon had begun. For days they marched, the earth trembling beneath their advance. The rivers ran red with reflection of the blood moon that now hung over the skies, larger and brighter than ever. It was as though the heavens themselves were watching, waiting for the outcome of fate's cruel design. On the eve of the first battle, Serafina stood alone upon the ridge, overlooking the enemy's fires burning across the plain. The night was heavy, the air charged with the scent of rain and iron. She closed her eyes, and for the first time, she heard the call of the moon, not a whisper, but a command. It was not mercy the gods sought. It was balance. The flame within her rose, unfurling like wings. Silver fire licked across her skin, her eyes glowing with the light of the ancient Lina who had come before her. The prophecy lived through her now, and she understood at last, she was not born to be the Alpha King's bride. She was born to stand beside him in the war that would reshape their kind. When dawn broke, the battlefield came alive with chaos. Wolves clashed beneath the crimson sky. Steel rang against fang, blood against flame. Kale's roar shook the heavens, his wolf form towering and unstoppable, shadow incarnate. Serafina's power burned through the ranks like living fire, a tide of light that purified the darkness. Wherever her flame touched, corruption withered. The armies of Ravik faltered, but they did not fall. For behind them, the bloodstone spear began to glow, a weapon alive, feeding on chaos, thirsting for her power. And then she saw him, Ravik, cloaked in blood and shadow, wielding the spear like a god of ruin. His eyes were voids of crimson, his voice a growl that split the storm. When their powers met, the sky itself screamed. Light and shadow collided in a blast that tore the clouds apart. The ground split, rivers boiled, mountains shuddered. The energy consumed everything in its path, devouring air, time, and reason. For a heartbeat, Serafina felt herself unravel. Her body, her soul, her flame, all melting into the raw essence of creation. But through the chaos, she felt his presence, Kale, his power wrapping around hers, holding her to the world. They fought as one, bound by bond and love and fury. And when the light finally faded, Ravik was gone, consumed by the weapon he had tried to wield. The bloodstone shattered, its fragments scattering into the wind like dying embers. Silence fell across the battlefield. The storm broke. The wolves lifted their heads and howled, not in mourning, but in victory. Kale stood amidst the ruins, his chest heaving, his eyes searching until they found her. And though the world was still burning, she smiled, faint, tired, but alive. For the prophecy had been fulfilled. The war had ended, and the bond of flame and wolf had not brought ruin, but rebirth. As the moon rose high above the blood-soaked land, its light turned pure once more. The war of blood and moon was over. And from its ashes, a new dawn awaited. The battlefield lay quiet beneath the ghostly shimmer of the fading moon. Smoke drifted over the fields where wolves and warriors alike had fallen, the air thick with the scent of blood and rain. Yet beneath that ruin, life stirred. The silence that followed the storm was not one of death, it was the silence of the world holding its breath, waiting for what would come next. The war of blood and moon had ended, but its echoes lingered. As dawn broke over the mountains, the first light touched the land, hesitant, trembling, like a blessing offered after a long curse. The crimson haze that had haunted the skies for weeks began to fade, replaced by soft golds and pale blues. The clouds parted slowly, and the wind carried away the ashes of war. Cale stood alone upon the ridge, his cloak torn, his armor scarred with soot and blood. His hands still trembled faintly from the power that had nearly consumed him. Around him, the warriors of Shadowfang and the allied packs moved quietly, tending to the wounded, gathering the fallen. He watched the valley below, where moments ago chaos had reigned, and saw life returning in fragile waves. Wolves shifting back into human form, embracing, weeping, some kneeling in prayer beneath the light. The war had taken much, but it had not taken all. He turned his gaze toward the horizon, and found her. Serafina stood at the heart of the battlefield, her gown torn and blood-stained, her hair wild in the morning wind. The fire that had once blazed from her form now shimmered faintly beneath her skin, like embers at rest. Around her, the air was still, as if the world itself bowed before her presence. When she lifted her eyes, they no longer glowed with celestial power but with something deeper, more human, peace. Cale descended the slope slowly, each step echoing the weight of every battle he had fought. His wolf stirred within him, restless but silent, recognizing in her not only the maid of prophecy but the queen of rebirth. As he reached her, the light of dawn spilled fully across the plain, painting her in gold. The two of them stood amidst ruin and renewal alike, the Alpha King and the Wolf Queen, and for the first time in centuries, balance had returned to the world of wolves. For weeks after the war, the kingdom healed. The Shadowfang Keep became a place of rebuilding. The wounded were brought home. The dead were honored with moonlit pyres that rose toward the stars like prayers of light. Each pack, once divided by pride and power, now sent envoys to swear loyalty not by fear but by choice. The ancient councils that had long manipulated the throne were dissolved, their power broken. The new era would not be ruled by bloodlines alone but by unity, wolves and humans, betas and omegas, all bound by one banner. And at its head stood Serafina and Cale. Together they rebuilt not only walls but hope. Under Serafina's guidance, the old temples of the moon were reopened, not as places of worship alone but of knowledge, where young wolves could learn the balance between strength and spirit, between fire and restraint. She herself trained the chosen priestesses, teaching them the true nature of Luna's gift, not to dominate, but to protect. Cale, meanwhile, reformed the rule of the Alphas. He summoned leaders from every territory. Rai, once rivals, now brothers in arms, and forged the Council of the Unified Claws, a circle not of subservience but shared authority. No longer would one Alpha's greed decide the fate of thousands. The kingdom, once fractured, began to breathe as one again. But even as peace settled like a long-awaited dawn, memories of war lingered within Serafina. At night, she would walk the silent halls of the keep, her bare feet brushing against marble cold with history. Sometimes she would pause by the great balcony overlooking the valley, the same place where once she had stood as a prisoner, on the day she had been meant to marry for alliance, not love. The air felt different now, lighter, freer. Below, the forest shimmered silver in moonlight. The howls that rose were not of mourning, but song, the anthem of a people reborn. And yet, in her heart, she could still hear the faint echo of the prophecy. When the moon bleeds and the flame rises, balance shall be restored, but the heart must break to heal the soul of the pack. She had thought she understood it, that it had already come to pass. But destiny was never so simple. One evening, as the sun melted behind the mountains, Serafina found herself drawn to the ancient crystal chamber, the same place where the sealing of her flame had occurred. The runes carved into the walls glowed faintly as she approached, whispering in the old tongue. Within the pool of still water at its center, she saw her reflection, not just her face, but the echo of every version of herself she had ever been. The frightened princess, the runaway bride, the captive, the warrior, the queen. Each image flickered and faded, until only the woman she was now remained. And she realized the prophecy had not been about destruction, but transformation. It was never meant to warn, it was meant to guide. The heart that must break was not hers alone. It was the heart of their world, broken by centuries of power, pride, and cruelty. And through her and Kale, it had been made whole again. When she rose from the chamber, the moonlight followed her like a living flame. She found Kale waiting at the threshold, tall, scarred, weary, but smiling in that quiet, unspoken way that only he could. He reached out his hand, and she took it, her fingers fitting perfectly between his. Together they walked to the tower balcony, the kingdom spread before them like a sea of silver and shadow. The wind carried the sound of distant laughter, children of both wolf and human blood playing together beneath the stars. Kale's gaze softened as he looked upon his realm, and for the first time, there was no trace of the burden that had always haunted him. Only peace. As they stood beneath the moon's glow, the bond between them pulsed once more, not as the Khan's humming flame of prophecy, but as a steady warmth. The kind of fire that doesn't destroy, but endures. That night, the moon shone brighter than it had in 1,000 years. It was said by those who witnessed it that a new constellation appeared above the Shadowfang lands, two intertwined wolves, one wreathed in flame, the other in shadow. The elders called it the mark of balance, the symbol of the new age. And so it came to pass that the world of wolves, once divided by blood and fear, entered an era of unity. The Alpha King ruled not by dominance, but by strength and wisdom. The Wolf Queen guided not by fire and wrath, but by compassion and purpose. Together they became the heart of the new kingdom, the eternal bond of shadow and flame, moon and sun, love and destiny. The war of blood and moon faded into legend, and the tale of the runaway princess who found her power, and her mate, became a story passed from pack to pack, whispered beneath the stars for generations. And whenever the wind swept through the forests of Shadowfang, carrying the scent of rain and moonlight, it was said that the spirits of Kale and Seraphina still walked there, not as rulers or gods, but as guardians of the peace they had bled to build. The first snow of the season fell upon Shadowfang Kingdom like a benediction. Soft, silent, and pure, as if the heavens themselves sought to cleanse the land of all that had been scarred. The flakes drifted down from a pale silver sky, melting against the marble steps of the great citadel and the black steel spires that crowned the capital. It had been 1 year since the war of blood and moon ended. 1 year since Seraphina and Kale stood together upon the ashes of battle and vowed to rebuild their world from the bones of the past. Now the kingdom thrived again. Where once there had been ruins, new towers rose, not as fortresses of fear, but as halls of unity. The cities of wolves no longer hid from the world of men. Trade caravans from the human kingdoms now crossed the borders freely, their banners fluttering beside the sigil of the Wolf Queen, a flaming moon encircled by twin wolves. And at the heart of it all stood Shadowfang Keep, transformed. Once a fortress of stone and silence, it now glowed with life. Lanterns lined the corridors, laughter filled the halls, and the scent of pine and frost lingered in the air. Within those walls, Seraphina ruled with a grace that carried both fire and calm, a ruler forged in war, tempered by compassion. She had learned that true power was not found in dominance but in understanding. Not in fear, but in faith. Yet even in peace, she could never forget how close the world had come to falling apart. Each night, as the moon rose high, she would stand upon the grand balcony of the citadel, the same place where, long ago, she had once tried to flee her fate. The same night she had found him waiting for her. The Alpha King, her mate, her destiny. That memory lingered in every heartbeat. The terrified girl who had once tried to escape her wedding carriage, running from a future she thought would destroy her, never realizing it would save her instead. And tonight, as snow drifted down over the kingdom, that memory burned brighter than ever. Because tonight marked a year since the coronation, and a new ceremony awaited them both, the binding of eternal moons, a sacred rite performed only once in a generation, sealing not just their reign, but their souls for eternity. She wore no crown that night, only a cloak of silver fur that brushed the marble behind her. The moonlight touched her hair, making it shimmer like living fire. Her eyes, once full of uncertainty, now carried the serenity of one who had walked through storms and survived them all. She looked out upon the kingdom, her kingdom, and breathed deeply. The wind whispered through the valley, carrying the scent of snow, pine, and the distant call of wolves. Behind her, soft footsteps approached. Kale. He no longer wore the armor of war. The once fearsome Alpha King now carried the calm authority of a ruler at peace. His eyes, those storm-colored depths that once burned with fury, now held warmth. When he reached her, he didn't speak, he didn't have to. His presence alone said everything words could not. The years had taught them both that silence, between true mates, was never empty. Together they stood, side by side, watching their realm breathe beneath the moon. Soon, the bells began to ring, deep, resonant tones that echoed through the mountains. From the villages below to the farthest packs beyond the valley, wolves lifted their heads to the sky and howled as one. The binding of eternal moons had begun. The courtyard was lit with thousands of candles. Wolves in ceremonial cloaks lined the great steps leading down to the sacred pool, the moon's mirror. The water glimmered with the reflection of the full moon, as if the heavens themselves had descended to bless the earth. When Serafina and Kale stepped forward, the howls quieted. The only sound left was the wind and the steady rhythm of their hearts, beating in unison. The high priestess, once Serafina's mentor, now her loyal friend, raised her staff, its crystal glowing with lunar light. Her voice carried through the night like song. When the flame meets the shadow, and the moon binds the two, let balance reign eternal. Let the fire never fade, and the night never fall alone. As the words echoed, the waters of the moon's mirror began to shimmer. The reflection of the moon rippled, and from its surface, a beam of light rose, wrapping around the two of them like a living ribbon of silver and gold. It wasn't pain that filled them, it was peace. The kind that feels like coming home. The light wove around their wrists, across their hearts, through their souls. And in that instant, Serafina saw everything, not just who they were, but every lifetime they had lived, every bond that had brought them back to each other across centuries. The runaway bride, the cursed king, the lovers bound by prophecy and flame. Every version of themselves converging in this single, eternal moment. When the light faded, the world seemed to exhale. The moon above brightened until its glow bathed the entire valley. The people knelt. The wolves bowed their heads. And the high priestess whispered, her voice trembling with awe, "It is done. The moon has chosen her eternal rulers." But Serafina and Kale were no longer listening. They turned to each other, and smiled. Not with victory, not with relief, but with the quiet, enduring joy of souls that had found rest. The celebration that followed lasted for days. Music filled the halls, bonfires lit up the night, and the packs danced beneath falling snow and moonlight. Children ran through the courtyards, laughter mingling with the howl of the wind. Yet amidst all the joy, Serafina and Kale found their peace in solitude. That night, as the last embers of celebration faded, they returned to the balcony overlooking the valley. The stars stretched endless above them, painting the sky with light. Serafina leaned against the railing, her eyes soft. "Do you hear them?" she whispered, though in truth, her voice was only a thought. The howls of their people rose faintly from the mountains below, one continuous harmony that seemed to blend with the rhythm of the wind. Kale's arm came around her, pulling her close. His warmth was steady, his heartbeat grounding. "I do," his thoughts echoed within her. "And they sound free." She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. The world that once chained her had become the very thing she had freed. The Alpha who once terrified her had become her forever. The runaway bride had not escaped her fate, she had rewritten it. As the night deepened, the moon reached its zenith. Its light fell across them like a blessing. And then, something wondrous happened. From the heart of the moon's mirror below, a faint glow rose into the sky. The silvery light twisted upward until it formed the shape of two wolves, one wreathed in flame, the other cloaked in shadow, circling each other before merging into one radiant being. The heavens shone brighter than ever. And the packs that looked up that night knew, the prophecy had not only been fulfilled. It had evolved. A new one was born. When the eternal moon shines upon the hearts of two, their love shall guard the realms beyond time. Shadow and flame shall guide the dawn forever. It became legend, the story of the queen who ran from her destiny and the king who waited for her in the carriage, both bound not by duty, but by love powerful enough to remake the world. And so, as centuries passed and kingdoms changed, their tale endured. On nights when the snow fell under the full moon, and the wind whispered through the forests of Shadowfang, travelers would swear they saw two figures standing upon the distant balcony, a woman with fire in her hair and a man with eyes like storms, watching over their realm. Not as rulers, not as gods, but as soulmates, eternally bound beneath the moonlight. Because even in death, love does not end. It transforms. It becomes eternal.